Hello, everybody, and welcome to your Ruby Live event. My name is Eric Weinkoop, and I'm the Director of Culinary Instruction here at Ruby, and I'm also one of your instructors in the courses. And specifically, I'd like to welcome you to my office hours today. And this is an event that I do every 3 weeks, as needed, as scheduling allows. And this is your chance to ask just about any question, in particular as it pertains to food and cooking, and I'll do my best to respond to them. As I frame out the context, of our domain today. I'd like you to really focus on food and cooking, and to avoid straying into medical questions or questions that might be more appropriate for a dietitian, for example. Okay. I have a couple of quick items of housekeeping to cover before we jump into today's questions. And the first item is that if you would like to participate directly by posting a question or a comment, take a look at the dialog box in the upper right-hand corner of your screen that says Add Question Here. Go ahead and type in your question in a complete sentence, which will make it easier for me to really understand what you're after. And that'll make its way into the queue, which you see already populated on the right-hand side of the screen. And as you look at the individual questions that are already posted, you'll see a heart-shaped icon. Now, if you would like that question answered a little bit sooner than later, go ahead and click on that heart, and it'll push up that question in the queue in priority. Okay, but otherwise, we'll take a look at the list of questions today. All right, so without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in. And I'd like to address the first question from Mackenzie, who writes, I am struggling getting my knife cuts even. I'm in a wheelchair and struggle seeing over the knife. Any suggestions? So we've got a general question, one that I hear with some frequency, regarding knife cuts, but also a more specific context here. One of being in a particular position relative to the cutting board and the knife and the product being cut. Okay. Let me start out by talking about knife cuts more generally. And on one hand, we have our assignments that focus on knife skill development. And then there's knife cuts more generally in your day-to-day cooking. Okay. So regarding the assignments, on one hand, it may be as simple as knife cuts. May sound, these assignments are, in my opinion, the most challenging because they're the most technical assignments in our courses. Okay, and what I mean is that there is a specific benchmark that we use, and it's the cut dimensions, right, for each of the cuts that we introduce. So, for example, a small dice is a 1/4 inch cube. It's not a little bit less, and it's not a little bit more. And so if what you present is a little bit off target, then it's subject to a point deduction. All right. And then also, we will take a look at the consistency of your cuts. And we're looking for consistency across the sampling, that handful approximately of product that you submit. And again, here comes the technicality, right? If there is some inconsistency throughout your cuts, then it's subject to a point deduction. Okay, so that's what I mean when I say that these assignments are the most difficult in our courses, because once you get into the cooking courses or cooking assignments rather, there's much more leeway in terms of hitting the target for a particular learning outcome. All right. So just keep that in mind for all of you that are looking at the knife cut assignments. Okay, it's difficult to receive 100%. Okay, very, very difficult. But understand that knife cuts, that the skill development is an ongoing process. And of course, I encourage you to focus on that process to the extent that you want to or that you need to. Okay, which gets me into the second part of my lead in, which is your day-to-day cooking and knife cuts. Okay, some of you, right, may choose to focus on some very refined, consistent knife cuts, call them, visually appealing, particularly visually appealing, around special occasions or special dishes that you might make. And it's part of the presentation of the food, along with a garnish and the other colors that you might present through your ingredient selection. The consistency and the shape, the accuracy of knife cuts also goes a long way to creating a sharp-looking, no pun intended, I guess, but a visually appealing dish. Okay. Now, we don't usually worry about that on a day-to-day basis, right? We all have busy lives, and we want to get food prepped reasonably quickly. And so, we're after some generally consistent cuts so that the food will cook evenly, but we're probably not worried about the precision and that exact eye appeal that we might be interested in on a special occasion day. Okay, so you get to choose at the end of the day just how precise you want to be. Okay, so for the assignment itself, and going back to Mackenzie's question, the challenge of being at a certain height and that angle of sight that we have on the product and the cutting board and the knife. Okay, so if it's difficult or not possible to get over the knife to really see the alignment of the knife, okay, relative to the cutting board and relative to the food product, then it's going to be a matter of practicing. Okay, you're gonna make a cut, feeling and knowing where your hand is and where the knife is, and then look at the results, and then make an adjustment. You're gonna, you're this way, or you're this way, or you're right on. And so just keep on practicing until you can make the best cuts that you can, and the best cuts that you reasonably want to maintain on a day-to-day basis. Okay, so I appreciate the challenge that you present for me to think about here, and hope that you will take that approach, one of practice, and also, just understanding that the goal is overall consistency on a day-to-day basis. But of course, when it comes to the assessment, we're going to push you to aim high. Okay, understanding that as you add speed to your food prep and your knife cuts, that we lose accuracy. Right, that's the balance in the kitchen. Okay. So for your assignments, do the best that you can, practice as needed before you submit those assignments. Thank you. All right, next up, we've got a question from Marina. Hello, and how do you do? Good to see you again. Can you please break down the process of recipe development? So we've got a potentially big question here, right, in this process of recipe development. And on one hand, there's a bit of a process that one could write down and follow, or at least think about. I'll start off by saying that there are certainly multiple approaches to recipe development. The first step is really the acquisition of knowledge and experience, okay, first and foremost. So you want to expose yourself to a lot of cooking and a lot of repetitive tasks so that you can best understand how fundamentally temperature and time affect the outcome of a process. Okay, so a little higher temperature, a little lower temperature, a little shorter or longer time on the simmer, the braise, the grill, etc. And you start to understand the nuances, right, of what's going on and how best to control for that. And then along with that comes a knowledge of how ingredients interact, along with that balance of taste, right? Those basic tastes, along with those thousands of flavors. We have texture to think about in the different ingredients, whether they're served in a raw state or a cooked state or something in between. Okay, the texture, of course, is going to differ, and we have some control over that. And then there's the visual presentation or visual appeal of that individual component that goes on the plate as it contributes to the entirety, okay, of the preparation. And so visual appeal could be the application of caramelization, okay, through a dry heat cooking method, right? Or the absence of that through selecting a moist heat cooking method, okay? And so there's flavor implications, but we have a choice in that department, okay? Now, again, critical engagement, right, throughout the cooking process and throughout a period of time is really what's is going to get you there. Okay, so for example, as I sit around and think about altering a recipe that I see, or just wondering if I can sort of create a new version of something that I might see in a photographic form. I think about swapping in and out ingredients, and I have a reasonably good idea of what those combinations will taste like, just based upon my experience. Of course, I need to try it out ultimately to understand the nuances and to see what I want to alter in terms of ratios or quantities otherwise, okay? But that's the benefit of experience, okay, is to have that sort of confidence and control over the process from the very first step, okay? Now, in terms of gaining that experience, my path is always to look at global cuisine. That's where the diversity lies, right? It's looking at the world of flavor literally, and understanding within each cultural context how particular ingredients and therefore tastes and flavors function, okay, and function with something else. And so that's the number one goal, right, is to create that foundation, that starting place that allows this process to become much easier. Okay. Now I mentioned cooking method or choice of cooking method. And I think that's important, right? Because the results can vary quite a bit, whether it's a moist heat method or a dry heat method. And for example, if it's a dry heat method, do we choose saute, or do we choose to grill? Or maybe it's the efficiency of volume preparation in an oven through the roasting method that we might choose. Okay, so there should be a reason why you choose each component in each step along this path of recipe development. Okay. Also consider the quantity of the food that may be prepared. Okay. In terms of, is it volume cooking in some form? Maybe it's catering at some level, or is it a meal for four? Okay, and that will inform the equipment that you might choose, which also might inform the cooking method that you might choose. Okay, now keep in mind, this is an important one. Keep in mind the flavor development that you get from dry heat cooking methods. I think that's a strategy that we need to be aware of whenever we're cooking. Okay. Because along with herbs and spices and these, acidifying ingredients and other choices from our pantry, the cooking method also can have a very large impact on the flavor outcome. Okay. Then start to think about plating, right? What do you want this food to look like when it's presented? I mean, is it a buffet, sort of a party, catering, large volume format, or is it a individually plated dish or meal? Okay, and think about the components around plating, such as height development on the plate. In order to build that third dimension on a plate, we need some components that are stackable, right? That have the stability within them to hold up their own weight or the weight of something else that may be laid on top of that or leaned on that component in order to build that height. Okay. Sometimes height can be built simply by adding a garnish, whether it's a savory tuile or a breadstick, or it could be a sprig of herb if you want to go down that path. But there are some other simpler ways where the structure of your food is perhaps less important, but nonetheless, think about that third dimension on the plate. Think about what garnish you're going to use in terms of visual appeal, color contrast, and also texture contrast. Okay. And then also think about service timing. So in other words, is this item that you're developing, this recipe that you want to create, will it be placed out at room temperature, for example, as an appetizer, and therefore is able to just sit around for a while, okay, without deteriorating in quality? Or is this a dish that should be served hot and therefore immediately for full enjoyment? Okay. And, with that comes flavor intensity, aroma intensity. All right. So hot foods, right? This is a spectrum that we can, of temperature that we can imagine. Okay. Where hot items have the most molecular activity. Therefore, they have the potential to be most aromatic and have that first sort of hit on the olfactory senses around flavor, okay, flavor perception. And as an item drops in temperature to room temperature and finally to a chilled temperature, then flavor intensity drops. We also need to think about then how we can accentuate seasoning. Right? Maybe we need to increase acidity or increase salt, for example, in order to maintain palate interest as the service temperature drops on that particular item. Okay, so all these are all important pieces, right, of that recipe development pie, right, so to speak. Okay. And then, so, as you touch upon these different areas that I just mentioned, of course, there is a testing process, an adjustment process with each of these areas. All right. So this is where recipe, the actual testing process comes into play, where you might alter quantities or particular ratios, and keeping in mind that as you change the ingredient variety, that might affect other relationships within that dish. Okay. And so as seasons change and the quality of food changes, or as the place of origin of the food changes, right, that you select, you'll need to do some further testing. Okay. But this is that general process that I follow when developing a recipe. Okay, and to bring this full circle, let me summarize that for me, developing a recipe is usually taking an existing recipe or an idea. It could be in written form, or it could just be a photograph that I see, and then altering that in some way to better suit my particular situation or my particular occasion, right, or my particular client, right, my particular family's flavor preferences. Okay. And then, secondarily, it would be the creation of something new. Okay. Which is, certainly possible, but it takes a little bit more time, I think. So Marina, I hope that gets you off and running. in terms of tinkering and developing recipes. Thank you. All right, next up, we've got a question from Trina. Do you have gluten-free options for students that can't do gluten in your recipe assignments? Yes, generally speaking, I think our assignments, and certainly most of our lessons and the practices assignments or practice recipes have a gluten-free option. If you come across a section where you don't see that, then reach out to us, and we're happy to work with you in identifying something that would be suitable for you. Okay, we have students that come through every day that have some sort of a change that is necessary, right? Whether it's a religious prescription, whether it's a dietary requirement, or just a personal preference. So we do these sort of alterations quite regularly. Okay, but usually they become a case-by-case, sort of an individually tailored answer. So if you have any questions along the way, please reach out at support@ruby.com, and we can have a dialogue in that format. Thank you. All right, next up is a question about peeling garlic. What's your favorite method to peel garlic? On some days, my favorite method is to purchase already peeled garlic. But if I've got to peel the garlic myself, I suppose it depends on how I'm going to use that garlic. If I'm going to cut it, chop it, mince it, break it down with a knife in some fashion, or otherwise the shape of the clove is not important, then I'll probably just give it a whack, maybe with the edge of the knife, or maybe just press it with the palm of my hand on the cutting board in order to break the skin, which makes it, in most cases, pretty easy to peel. Okay, and if the shape of the clove must remain intact, right, for visual presentation, then I'll take the time, often with a paring knife, to cut off that, I guess what would be the stem end, that end that's attached to the bulb, and then more carefully peel back the layers of skin. And sometimes I'm going to sit down at the table and do a whole bunch of that, and enjoy the process. Okay, so those are a couple of things that I do. All right, thank you. All right, next is a question. Hello, Grace. What's the right way to freeze fruits, for example, blueberries and cooked beans and lentils? Aha. So, potentially and probably there's more than one right way to do this. But what comes to mind for me is to, let's see, in the case of berries, blueberries and other berries as well, is to set them out in a single layer on a sheet pan, and then stick that whole thing in the freezer so that the berries freeze individually. Okay, so that we have individually frozen berries. And then I will package those into a container, usually some sort of a resealable bag, and then that resides in the freezer. Okay, now in terms of legumes of various sorts, for me, they're usually going into a container with a tight-fitting lid in a volume, right, or a unit size that is convenient to my cooking pattern here at home, right, or in the case of a restaurant, in that setting. Okay, so here at home, I like to use what we call in the U.S. deli containers. And deli containers are plastic cylindrical containers with a kind of a snap, tight-fitting lid. And it's what you might see at a deli, right, that serves food to go. And you can certainly use leftover containers from the store if you have those. Or you can purchase these. And, in my neighborhood here, I'm lucky enough to have a restaurant supply store nearby, which is also open to the public. And they sell these deli containers in different sizes. I see them in a 1 cup, right, an 8 fluid ounce size, a pint, right, or a 16 fluid ounce size, and a quart, right, a 32 fluid ounce size. And each of those has the same size lid, right, which is nice. And so, I will use, any of those 3 sizes, depending on what it is that I'm placing into the freezer. Okay. And those containers are reusable as well. All right. I hope that's helpful. Thank you. All right. Next question. What's the best way to make delicious sauces for vegetables without using a roux? Okay. So the best way, well, I'll talk about, at least 1 or 2 ideas that come to mind. I'm sure there are probably some others out there. I often go toward Mexico, right, or Mexican-inspired sauces. Sometimes it's India, okay, which uses a lot of what are called gravies, which are another word for sauces, okay, in various preparations. And so I think salsa, okay, and you can produce fresh salsa, and you can vary the size of the cut to accompany different vegetable dishes, depending on how you want the dish to look and how you want the salsa to adhere to the food or sit obediently on a fork or spoon as you're eating that food item. Okay. There are also, blended, many blended salsas, which definitely cling and nappe on the food, and are very nice choices to finish vegetable preparations of any sort. Okay. So salsas could be raw, okay, in their fresh state, often tomato and onion based. Salsas can also be cooked to some degree or another. And, this is where we might see dried chilies that are used. And they are quickly grilled or griddled to bring out some flavor, and then soaked in hot water and then blended with other ingredients. Then we also have the addition of nuts. Sometimes they are nut-based sauces, but certainly the addition of nuts to a sauce and then blended in a blender of some sort. I use a high-speed blender and always recommend those where possible. And then that creates a very different experience in terms of the mouthfeel and the way that the sauce clings to the food item. And so I recommend that you give that a try, okay? And all of those, of course, are going to be free of a roux. All right, thank you. All right, let's see, next question. What's the easiest sauce to make veggies more tasty? So very similar to the one that I just addressed, but I will also add that, you can use a vinaigrette or any kind of a salad dressing that you might enjoy with any other vegetable preparation outside of a more traditional leaf lettuce salad. Okay, I think that's a great place to start. And of course, something like a vinaigrette is very quick to prepare, and the flavor profile can be nudged in different directions very easily according to your needs. And so you've got great flexibility. Okay. And so, couple that idea with what we just talked about, and I think you've got a nice selection of sauces for various vegetable preparations. All right, thank you. And next up, the question from Debbie reads, will we be learning how to flavor our cooking with different types of spices and herbs? And the quick answer is yes. In our courses, we do introduce herbs and spices, and we have a selection of practice recipes for you to start that process, okay, of learning, that is. And I will add to that the rest of it is up to you, to some extent or another, right? There's certainly references out there, many references that I always encourage cooks to use, such as the Flavor Bible. There's also the Vegetarian Flavor Bible as a place to start, but also many other options, both online and in print, okay, depending on your preference. And, keep in mind that, here at Ruby, our goal is for you to focus on transforming yourself into a cook. Okay, and so we focus on methods and techniques, all right, in terms of food handling, application of heat, control of time, and then along with this process of practicing across a period of time is the acquisition of knowledge and skill. Okay, it comes through your experience. And so when we talk about herbs and spices, as you look at perhaps some sample, practice recipes from global cuisine to understand how flavors come together, then strive to push the book aside and to practice on your own. Okay, so your ingredient ratios that come together to form some sort of a spice blend don't necessarily have to be perfect, so to speak. Okay, they don't have to match exactly a recipe. All right, and let me give you some larger context. Okay, any sort of a spice blend recipe, for example, that we see on the Ruby website or in a book or in any other source, is simply an example, right, of a spice blend from that region of the world. So in other words, if you were to go to that region of the world, you might find somebody that makes it just like you see in print. Okay, but if you were to knock on that person's person's neighbor's door and ask them how they make that spice blend, there's a good chance they do it a little bit differently. Okay, and so with that understanding, I want to give you the power, right? The encouragement to make changes yourself, to alter ratios and flavor balance to suit your palate, and also to tinker, right? To experiment and to have fun in the kitchen. This is all part of the learning process. When you do make these changes, go small so that you don't end up inadvertently creating something that is inedible and having to sort of maybe throw that away or otherwise waste that opportunity, so to speak. Okay, and understand this is a process. Have patience with yourself and enjoy the journey. All right, thank you. All right, we've got another question here. This one reads, as a recent vegan, as well as my household, now how can I prepare for fall holidays coming up in ways that promote good food celebration and memories? Aha. Teresa, this sounds like your goal is to make a nice meal. All right. And, just as you have done in the past, okay, around holiday time, put your love and your effort into your cooking, and you're going to create meals that are enjoyable, okay, and that are memorable. Certainly they're going to be memorable this first time out, right? As you and your family have made a change to focus more on eating plants, or maybe eating plants exclusively, since you're using the V word, okay? But as I mentioned a couple of minutes ago with the previous question, focus on learning to cook. focus on skill development and knowledge acquisition. Okay, so that you can develop the confidence, number one, to follow a practice recipe, but more importantly, to step away from that recipe and to create dishes or to alter recipes on your own. Knowing that you're going to have results that you enjoy. Okay, excuse me, just a moment. All right. Otherwise, the basic process of cooking in order to make good food and good memories is going to be the same as it always has been, whether your focus is on vegetables exclusively or not. Okay. Keep in mind also that flavor is super important. That's what we're talking about, right? And to that end, start incorporating more fresh herbs and spices. And you're going to find a big boost, I think, in the aromatic quality and therefore the enjoyment, right, of that dish. All right. Bring other members into the kitchen. Involve the whole family in this new transition of yours. And enjoy the process of creating those memories together. And I think that goes a long way also in creating harmony and buy-in and appreciation, right, for the effort that went into the preparation of that meal. All right. Have fun. Thank you. All right. We got a question from Audi. What are your thoughts about using the New Wave oven in plant-based cooking? So the New Wave oven, I have not used directly, but I am generally familiar with it just from reading about it, from seeing photographs. And I think for cooking in general, and this would certainly include plant-based cooking, the New Wave oven can certainly be a good appliance, right, to use. There's nothing inherently wrong with it. It's just a matter of getting used to it. And, to some extent, it's going to require you to shift your cooking style or cooking patterns to fit that appliance. Okay. And I would say the same thing about, any other popular appliance right now, such as the electric pressure cookers that are on the market, as well as the air fryers that are on the market. Those all function very nicely in the kitchen. It's just a matter of sort of tailoring the things that you make to fit into those often smaller appliances. And, oftentimes sort of tailoring your style of cooking to match the outcomes that these appliances produce. Okay. But I think the New Wave oven can be, certainly a good appliance to use. Okay. As always, okay, with these appliances generally and brands specifically, I encourage consumers to look at reviews, product reviews online, and try to get an idea of how other people have experienced this particular appliance. Okay. Just as a hint, my approach is to just skip over all of the 5-star ratings, even the 4-star ratings, because good news is good news, right? And we're not going to disagree about that. The more interesting information is in the 1-star and 2-star ratings. I want to know what the gripes are, what the challenges are, what the shortcomings are of these appliances, and how they might relate to my situation or my personal preferences around certain challenges, right? A challenge to one person may not be a challenge to me, right? And vice versa. But I want to read about all of that, all of the bad news, so to speak, in order to best understand if I can handle this product or not. And so I encourage you to read product reviews also. Thank you. All right, the next question from Patricia. When I prepared the pho stock recipe, I left the orange slices to cook too long, and the citrus flavor turned the stock rather bitter. Is there a particular spice you would recommend next time to counter this bitterness to salvage the stock? Patricia, I've been there. I remember my first batch of this pho stock was pretty bad in terms of the imbalance, the bitterness. And I tinkered with it. And there's really nothing that I found that would, effectively mask or I should say balance, right, that bitterness. I had left the citrus in for a pretty long time, and it got really bitter, and I just wasn't able to get rid of that. What I was able to use was that stock in very small units, very small quantities, as a seasoning or a taste balancer, right? Adding in complexity and a touch of bitterness to soups and stews, and also there's a lot more other ingredients that you can mix with a small quantity of the stock if you wanted to really utilize what you would produce rather than throw it away. But no, I have not come across a spice that will balance that strong bitterness, at least to my satisfaction. Okay, there's going to be strong bitterness that remains. All right, thank you. All right, next up, let's see, from Leslie. I want to make sensational vegetable sides of restaurant quality to serve my family. I'm not a good cook and suck at timing and flavorings, therefore need to follow recipes. Any hints or recommendations of books I can read to improve this, please? Okay, I'm going to take another sip of water here as I prepare for a long-winded response. Leslie, I see a wonderful scene here from about 10,000 meters, okay? And so I see this starting point where you describe yourself, right, as not being a good cook. And then I see this end point, right, of you serving sensational vegetable sides, okay, of restaurant quality. And in between here, I see this beautiful process of learning, of practicing, of developing your skills, of acquiring a lot of knowledge around cooking methods and ingredients and how different dishes come together, okay? And this process can take some time. It depends on your frequency of cooking, the volume of cooking, these sort of factors, as well as, your own personal learning curve, okay? But I want you to enjoy that process, and I want you to focus on, I would recommend a Ruby course, right? If you're not already enrolled. I think we do a great job in focusing on handling, right, of ingredients through the cooking methods and ancillary techniques that form the foundation of confidence, right, as well as the skills and the knowledge that will allow you to start cooking better and better, right, as you continue down your path, acquiring experience along the way. Okay, so that's my hint. In terms of books, you can look around at books. I don't have any to recommend just offhand. And you can certainly look at a book and find a recipe, but you're going to be bound to the recipe. And when you want to make something else, you got to look for another recipe, and then you'll be bound to that recipe. Okay. But even within recipes, you need to tinker and make adjustments based upon your own equipment, the specific ingredients that you choose, the way that you cut something, and so on and so forth. So recipes are not foolproof either, or adjustment proof, maybe I should say. Okay. And so the best long-term solution, right, to connect points A and B as I see them for you, is to take the long road and to be patient with yourself and the process, and to enjoy those many experiences along the way. All right. Thank you. All right. Another question from Grace. In Unit 6, Task 116, so this sounds like forks over knives. There were lessons on roasting nuts. Would you give recommendation on roasting duration time for different kinds of nuts? No. I don't have specific times to give for different nuts, but I will give you a hint, okay? This is all about the empowerment of the cook, right? And I want to encourage you to use all of your senses and to stay engaged with the food throughout the process, and you'll turn out some properly handled nuts and seeds right from the oven. Okay. Now set your oven to, at least in Fahrenheit, about 300 degrees. It could be a touch less, it could be a touch more. And then place the nuts or seeds, just one type in a container. Don't mix them because they come in different sizes. Okay. So get one type on a container, a flat container like a sheet pan. It could be a pie tin, but something with shallow sides, very low sides, because this lets the air circulate over the product nice and evenly. Okay, if you put the nuts in a container with high sides, the natural air circulation or convection in the oven will come around. It'll hit the side of the pan and come up, and then over the top and then back down. And it just takes longer to toast things because there's less contact with the warm air. Okay, so use something with shallow edges. All right, and then put that into the oven, and then you're going to check with your nose. You're going to wait for aroma. Don't wait to see color. Okay, because very often, if we wait to see color in an oven, which is often a little bit darker or has lighting that's a little bit less desirable, okay, then the nuts will overcook. They'll over brown. All right, the nuts and seeds, they will caramelize and otherwise toast pretty quickly. Okay, so you also can't walk away and take a shower or change the oil in your car or something like that. You got to stay close and wait for the aroma. Okay, take the product out. Okay, and you're good to go. Now, let the nuts or seeds cool down to room temperature and then taste them. That's where you're going to have the true essence of the texture as well as the resulting flavor. Okay. Now, if you find that the product is still a touch under toasted for your preference, then I need to wait for a little bit more aroma, right, coming from the oven. All right. So in other words, a little bit longer time in the oven, okay, in order to get to that ideal state of toasting. Okay. On the other hand, if you over toast, you're going to draw out bitterness from those seeds and from those nuts. And that bitterness will carry through in the dish that you prepare. And so we want to avoid bitterness. And therefore, we're using a relatively, I'll say moderate temperature, right? 300-ish Fahrenheit. And we're going to stay close to it, okay, in terms of checking for aroma and then pulling the product out of the oven to check, okay? Now, you notice that I recommend an oven and not the stovetop in a pan, okay? If you're using a pan on the stovetop, then this is the pan, okay? Your nuts go in the pan, and you're getting a single edge or side of high heat. And so the nut, right, as it makes contact, is going to get a hot spot, It's going to get an unevenly toasted and usually burnt spot, and maybe multiple burn spots before the interior of the nut is nicely toasted. Okay, so I prefer and always recommend the nice, gentle, enveloping heat of an oven. All right, thank you. All right, we've got Louis or Louie with another question. Let's see. For anyone in the plant-based course, should we get a two-sided sharpening stone that has a 400 grit side on one side and a 1,000 grit side on the other side? I think that's a bigger discussion. Okay, and so let's start. All right. Using a sharpening a stone, a wet stone, usually 2 or 3, usually 2, sometimes 3, is not for everyone, okay, because there is oftentimes a long learning curve in order to get to a point of confidence and real proficiency so that we're really handling the knife properly, putting a clean edge, one that's at a good angle for what we're trying to do, so that it lasts reasonably long. Now, in the meantime, you can booger up a lot of blades, okay, because wet stones will take metal off pretty quickly, especially when you get down into that 400 grit category. Okay, so a person needs to be the type of personality that wants to fiddle with knives. Okay. On the other hand, there are other tools, whether manual or electric, that will get you there more consistently and quicker, okay, in terms of putting a fresh edge on your blade. Now for the results. Okay. Now with practice, proper practice, a whetstone gives you more control and therefore the potential for better results when compared to these other tools. These ceramic disc sort of pull through tools or an electric sharpener. Okay, so there's a trade-off either way. So you get to figure out which path you want to take. All right. Now, in terms of the grit, I think a 400 and a 1,000, having those two stones is certainly one place to start. As I mentioned, 400 grit will take off a lot of metal. And I would, also consider pushing you up the grit scale. Okay, so where your coarse stone might be, maybe in the neighborhood of 800 grit. Or something certainly just a little bit higher than 400, to start off. It could be, let's say 800. And your next jump up would be something around 2,500 or so. 3,000, I think, would be fine. If it were 2,000, that's probably fine as well, but somewhere right in there. And those two stones would be adequate, okay, for most applications. If you want to really drill deep and you start to get very nuanced about how you handle your knives, then you might also add a third stone that is maybe 5,000 grit, or it could be even higher than that. Some folks use a 6,000 or an 8,000 grit that really puts a polish on that cutting edge as the finishing step. And that will not only allow the knife to be sharper, but also it'll give your knife the ability to hold the cutting edge a little bit longer. Okay, now that's going to be based upon your proper honing, right, on a steel on a daily basis, as well as storing your knife in a way so that it doesn't bang around with other things. Other knives, for example, in a drawer. Okay. So, hopefully this additional information is helpful to you, but certainly there's, a lot to think about when considering whetstones. Okay, but they can be fun and rewarding, but understand the learning curve. All right, thank you. Hey, Adair, aloha, and welcome. It's been a while. Hope you've been well. I just want to say thank you in the middle of an anti-inflammatory eating journey and in the elimination phase. Having graduated from the Whole Food Plant-Based Chef and Culinary RX courses is making it fun and delicious. So grateful for Ruby and you. Adair, thank you very much for visiting today. I know we've had many interactions in the past when you were enrolled as a student, and I have thought about you off and on. And it's good to see you today and to know that you're doing well. Thanks. All right, next up, any gluten-free substitutes for liquid smoke? Well, I think in terms of imparting smoke flavor, which I'm guessing is the goal, right? There's always a grill/smoker. Another option is a stove top smoker. And you can purchase those. There's also, stove top smoker that you can make. I make them by using, what is eventually a disposable aluminum hotel pan, that I get from the restaurant supply store nearby here. And I'll crumple up 4 balls of foil, put them in each corner, and put a rack on top of that. And then I'll get a second, disposable, reusable until I dispose of it, hotel pan as a lid. Okay, and I can lay the food items on the grate, and then I can smoke on that. Okay, that's another kind of a homemade form of a stovetop smoker. Okay, another option is to get a piece of charcoal and to start it as you would for grilling, but then take that usually a single piece of charcoal and then put it into some sort of a metal container, put that into your pot of food, and then put a lid on it. And you can let that sit for a few minutes, and that will impart some smokiness to your food without having to use liquid smoke. All right, thank you. All right, next question. First time online class is for me new, but I like Ruby class. How we are doing a sweet dark liquid sauce. Well, let's see here. Sweet dark liquid sauce. I guess there are some different contexts that come to mind. One idea is to make a balsamic vinegar reduction. And, that is, very simply using usually a moderate quality balsamic vinegar, and then slowly reducing that over gentle heat until it thickens to the viscosity that you want, right, based upon how you'll use it, okay? And balsamic vinegar, usually has pretty good sweetness to it, although some are more acidic than others, in which case you might want to add some sugar, in which case I would recommend a brown sugar of some sort, okay, to kind of match the flavor profile of the balsamic vinegar itself. Okay, so that's going to be one idea. Again, it depends on, what this sweet, dark liquid sauce is used for. You can certainly dissolve a brown sugar of some sort, right? Whether it's jaggery or piloncillo or something else from around the world. And then, thicken that until it matches the type of service that you're thinking of, okay? So anyway, again, without understanding more of the context, those are a couple of quick ideas right, that come to mind. All right, thank you. And next up, the question reads, wanted to ask about supplements like spirulina or chlorella or maca powder and so on. Are those considered processed food? Thank you. The quick answer is they're processed to some extent, right, from their natural states, unless you live in the place of origin of the maca or the spirulina, and you're able to harvest that and just eat it in its fresh state. Okay. Any of the things that are going to be packaged have certainly been processed to some degree or another. The next part of that this question or this scenario is that just simply it's going to be up to you as to whether you want to use that or not, or how frequently and how much you might want to use that. Okay. I hope that helps. All right. Thank you. All right. Next up from Sylvia. What's the best cheese to use when making pizza? Because I tried to use mozzarella cheese and has failed to become sticky. And what is the best yeast for making the dough? If we're talking about traditional cheeses, then, a milk-based mozzarella, let's see. Well, it's really been successful for me. I guess it would depend on if we're talking about a plant-based mozzarella, then plant-based cheeses can react in very different ways, in the heat of the oven. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, when it comes to plant-based cheeses, I don't have specific suggestions that come to mind immediately for those cheeses that become sticky. All right. This would require some searching on the internet or some testing a product myself. In terms of pinpointing a specific brand or a recipe that you might handle. Okay. Sorry, I don't have more solid information for you. Okay, when it comes to the cheese choice. Now, regarding yeast, you can certainly just use what's called for in the recipe that you're using. For example, many of the recipes that I've used recently call for an instant yeast. And we have some of that in the refrigerator, so that's what I use. But just follow the directions on the recipe for the best results. Keeping in mind that if you want to switch to a different type of yeast, then you'll need to alter the amount of yeast used, because you can't substitute different types of yeasts at the same amount. Okay, thank you. All right, next is from Robert. Best ways to get those gelatinous stocks more solid when cold. So they seem to be a little thin and would like to have a thicker, cold Jello-like finish. Okay, great. So we're talking about, animal-based, right? Bone-based stock. Whether it's seafood, right, or poultry, or some four-legged animal. Okay, and the gelatin, okay, comes from the breakdown of collagen. Collagen is a primary connective tissue that we find both in the muscle as well as around the various structures that hold the bones together. Okay, so number one is the simmering time in order to break down the collagen that then becomes the gelatin, okay, in the finished stock. And generally speaking, the larger and more dense the bones, the longer time is going to be required for simmering. Okay, and the next factor will be the water to bone ratio. And clearly, if there's more water, it's going to be a thinner stock. And so we can either use a smaller amount of water to start with, or you can strain the finished product and then reduce it in order to drive off moisture. And that's going to concentrate the gelatin and result in a more jello-like texture, okay, in that finished chilled stock. All right, so you've got two places, where you can you have control, right, and you can experiment. So one is going to be simmering time, and maybe it's three places, right? The second one being the water to bone ratio, and then the third is the reduction process after you've strained the otherwise finished stock. Okay, and keep in mind that if you want to play around in this step 3 that I mentioned, the reduction of the stock sort of phase, you have a lot of control there. Okay, where you can you can reduce stock by any percentage that you want. And I in the past used to reduce stock by probably by 80%. So that the result is very, very small. It's very, very syrupy when hot, and when chilled, it sets up like a hockey puck, certainly like an eraser, right, in terms of its stiffness. And that can be used, kind of as a form of, let's say, bouillon, right, in terms of a concentrated flavor cube, and added to a soup or a stew, right, or a sauce, in order to finish that particular item, the particular preparation. Do keep in mind that as the product reduces, as the stock reduces, you want to transfer it to a smaller pan, okay, so that it's deeper in the pan, and then start that process over again. And do that a couple of times as needed, because as the stock reduces, the chances of burning or at least scorching increases a lot. And after you put in all that time and effort to end up scorching your reduced stock, is a real bummer. And yes, I've been there. And so I always want to throw out that word of caution. Okay. But also taste it along the way, because bitterness or other off flavors can result. And so you taste it along the way and decide where you want to stop in that process. It could be based upon the thickness or the viscosity, or it could be mitigated by some flavors, undesirable flavors that might emerge. Okay, so keep that in mind. Thank you. And last up, we've got another question from Grace. And this question reads, will eating more beans and lentils cause uric acid? And wow, so this is a question on one hand that is probably best suited to a diet analysis by a dietitian, or otherwise, looking at literature from the medical community. Okay, for you to learn more about purine, right, which results in uric acid, and how that might affect people, but specifically you. Okay, and then I will also add that a balanced diet, right, is going to be most desirable. And for most people, most of the time, if we maintain a balanced and a varied diet, right, many different ingredients, then we avoid a lot of these issues that are in the media around sort of single element concerns like uric acid. Okay, but of course there is the individual health that needs to be considered as well. Okay, and part of I think the bigger question of handling legumes also is to cook them fully. There are some concerns that are associated with undercooked legumes. And certainly fully cooked legumes taste better, at least in my opinion, and they have a nicer, smoother texture. So be sure to cook them fully as well to mitigate some of these concerns. Okay. Thank you very much, Grace. And thank you to all of you that joined me today for my office hours and for this live event. I hope to see you again very soon. And in the meantime, enjoy cooking. All right. Bye-bye.